be to continue this sort of coordination, convening, and making sure we involve all the right people, and then provide oversight and facilitation of the working groups as we unfold this process. And we received 50,000. We had hoped, we were planning to use kind of the what's called the collective impact framework, where there's like a kind of the what they call a backbone organization that then helps the groups involved, and the work groups go after funding for those particular strategies that are worked out. With 50,000 at this point, we probably won't be able to do that particular structure, but we will come back to everyone with the kind of working framework for collaboration that will make the most sense. And in that process as well, I've been working with some of the steering committee members. We've been working together to figure out what we actually need, how much time we need in terms of that facilitation process, the coordination process, the convening, the herding cats, all of us being cats, as you can imagine. Many of you are already involved with that. And we're working that out. And if anybody or any entity feels like they would like to be considered in that role, please let myself or the steering committee members, which happen to be Bill Thorndike, Alex Campbell, Kathy Kesey, Teresa Cisneros, Stephen Sloan, and a number of us that kind of pitch into that role. So just let us know in the next week, hopefully within the next few days. That would be helpful. I think that's it. And I'm going to pass the gavel over to Alex.
Thanks, Kathy. And so looking forward, the next OCF has announced that July 1 is the deadline for the next round of applications for that same community rebuilding fund. I talked to Lee Madsen today, who is chairing the LTRG fundraising committee, to learn what they're thinking about submitting for. We thought it would make sense to invite a broad range of organizations to get together just to compare notes on what folks are planning on submitting for, so that we have an opportunity to support each other's applications rather than work on, multiple efforts that aren't as tied together as they could be. So Lee was going to talk to a couple of his other exec committee members about that today. But if your organization is considering applying for the OCF grant, and you would like to make sure that application is not duplicating another application, or somebody else's application isn't duplicating yours, please let Lee or I know that you'd be interested in that conversation. I'll put Lee's contact information in the chat as well. We talked about maybe doing it on Friday, after the LTRG meeting on Friday, but the time is to TBD, but just want to at least give everybody an opportunity to see the bigger picture of what as a region we're going to be going to OCF for.
That's great, Alex, thank you. And next on the agenda is to talk about R3V strategic planning. And we're sensing that we've got our mission and our values and all that sort of thing. We're having these meetings, but we think it's time now to start kind of a more formal strategic planning session or process. So we're thinking to do this late in the week of July 5th. So anyway, and then that will become the beginning of our process. And if, I've done a process called Done in a Day that has worked very, very well. We're thinking this would not be a full day. This would be probably a 3-hour session, and try to kind of get a first push on the plan. But if you have other strategic planning processes that you really believe in or know a facilitator for, please drop that into the chat if you would, or email someone on the steering committee that you know. And that would be much appreciated. Do you think, I would love, if anybody has objections to that week of July 5th, it could be a big vacation week for people, I don't know. But if you think that that's a bad idea, please let us know in the chat or by email. And so that brings us to the real heart of our program. And Alex, is it okay, will you introduce our speakers? Because I guess I can introduce the first, who is Mark Peterson, who's here to kind of give us an update on the COAD and the VOAD, just kind of what the current status is and what the future will be for them. Mark, do you want to jump in?
That's me. Hi, Stephen, and hi, everybody. Thankful that I had an opportunity to share a little bit about the Rogue Valley COAD. And maybe there's a lot of you that don't know what the COAD is and what we have been doing. And I'd like to share my screen if that's possible. Stephen, is that possible?
Yes, you have the right to do that.
I do have. Okay. Okay, can we see that? Good, all right. So the Rogue Valley COAD is the Rogue Valley Community Organizations Active in Disaster. And so just briefly, I want to share who we are and what we do. So who are we? The Rogue Valley COAD is not a 501(c)(3), and we do not keep a treasury of funds for any projects. The RV COAD acts as a coordinator in group monetary decisions. The COAD provides a forum to address community readiness, training, and exercise to be better and more effectively respond and recover from emergencies. And the COAD recognizes and supports the right of each of our members and organizations to make autonomous decisions affecting their organization. Here is a snapshot of some of the organizations that are members of the COAD, the Rogue Valley COAD specifically. There's over 54 organizations, but this is just an idea of who we're working with. As you can see, there's a mixture of state and city, interfaith, nonprofits that extend through the Rogue Valley as well as Josephine County. Many of them you're familiar with, and they have been long staples here in the Valley, and we've been partners with them, and they've been on the Rogue Valley COAD for many, many years. And so we have these relationships that we really value, and as a coordinating resource for the county, both Jackson and Josephine counties, these are our relationships that we hold dear. So what we do, what did I do with that slide? Oh, a little animation going on. Okay, the Rogue Valley COAD, this is our mission statement, in that we'll act as the Jackson and Josephine counties coordinating organization with local government agencies toward an organized collaborative response to and recovery from disaster by non-governmental organization, faith-based and community organizations and individuals. That's our mission. So how does that really play into it, and how do we do that specifically? We act as a coordinating organization, response and recovery with the emergency management coordinators having jurisdictional responsibility in a local disaster. Collaborate with emergency management in providing information to citizens and volunteering and donating. Coordinate staffing the emergency phone bank when called upon by Jackson County Emergency Management, and I will add Josephine County Emergency Management. Following an emergency, participate with emergency management in outreach. Act as Jackson and Josephine County's Unmet Needs Committee, coordinating NGOs, faith-based and community organization long-term recovery efforts in Jackson and Josephine counties. That is on there because that's what's written in the county plan. So that has changed. We are not the Unmet Needs Committee. That has evolved into the long-term recovery group. Our organization looks like this currently. I am the chair. The past chair is Dave Dodderer. Secretary is Jan Sanderson Taylor. And our committees are Communications Committee, Steve Bosbach with JC Airs, which is Jackson County Amateur Radios. Food donations are done through Chris Boss with Access. Clothing donations, Dave Robinson of Goodwill. In-kind donations is Ryan Roden at Living Waters Ministries. Monetary donations, Deanne Everson, United Way. Volunteering, myself. Elderly care, Les Connell with Northridge Center. Assisted living membership is Dave Dodderer. At-risk community is Connie Saldana. It is, I'm sorry, Cassie, we chatted with Cassie earlier today, and I put you in parentheses because you're going to probably be the one stepping up for that one. And then we do not have community awareness or media awareness. So I just want to speak briefly on what we did. We provided volunteers for the phone bank at the Jackson County 911 Center for the EOC on September 8th. And 4 of those volunteers stayed a week. We've onboarded 1,214 volunteers in our system. We've provided over 3,100 hours just at the expo. We supported the MARC with volunteers and bilingual individuals in both Medford and Phoenix. Supported the county COVID centers for 2 weeks with volunteers at the expo. Provided volunteers for Rogue Food Unite to deliver food to survivors in hotels, and organized the intake of thousands of pounds of food and clothing, including a multi-agency warehouse that is now at Living Waters. That's all I have, and I appreciate your time and the opportunity to share what I have. So let me unshare my screen, which I don't know really how to do that. I should have a little button, right?
I think there's down at the bottom. There's
yeah, and my.
Let's see if I can.
I'm making it bigger and.
Or the top middle. Do you have a?
Man, I'm clicking on the banner and the lower banner, and nothing is popping up. There we go. There we go. Now, I shared screen. Now I'm unsharing my screen. Okay.
Yeah, I've got. Yeah, I was able to control that. So that's great. Thank you, Mark. Are there any questions for Mark? Okay.
So I just as a follow-up, Stephen, I'm still having a difficult time with the whole lane thing, because as we talked, the Rogue Valley co-ed has this lane. The long-term recovery group, Jackson County Community Long-Term Recovery Group, has their lane. And then we have the R3V folks that have a lane, and I'm trying to understand all the lanes and work together as lanes. But as I see some of the organizational notes, I'm seeing the preparedness and those efforts that you're kind of looking for in these notes. It's what the Rogue Valley Co-ed has been doing for a long time. And the R3V, what you're doing, it's what the Long-Term Recovery Group has been doing. So I'm trying to just let it simmer and just let everyone play in their lanes and support each other. So I'm hoping we can continue that. That's my hope.
That's great. Yeah, Mark, and it is, I mean, as this evolves, right, over time, I think there's an interesting time element, right? Because you guys have been here, the co-ed has been around for a long time. It's like an ongoing thing, and the LTRG comes in response, right? And R3V is just, I would say, like an extra engine on the LTRG to make sure that the long-term changes, the long-term reimagining and rebuilding of the community happens, right? As the recovery of the housing and the businesses and all of that stuff happens with the LTRG. So, and just some of that coordination of all the other organizations, right? So this is all, it's all in a big conversation around what's needed, right? And I love something that Diane Everson said, or Deanne Everson said in one of our meetings: as long as there's unmet need, there's no such thing as duplication of effort. And I think that that's a great starting place, and we'll continue the conversation as we refine and identify needs and continue to meet them.
Fair enough.
Great. Thank you very much for that.
Julie got a question, I think.
Yeah, Mark, I just, because you and I both sit in so many meetings together, one of the best ways for me to really understand the LTRG in comparison with R3V is the LTRG is really focused on individual assistance. So what does an individual family or an individual person need in this recovery? Whereas my understanding that R3V is really focused on public assistance. So what do the organizations of our community need to recover? What do the cities, the jurisdictions, and how do those then get kind of bubble up from those individual needs? So they're related very much, but in a lot of ways, they also are very, very different. And so having that cross-pollination, I think, is really important. And anyone on the R3V steering committee can correct me if I'm wrong, but that's how I formate it in my head.
We don't want that, Lane, so we're glad you have it. So that would be another committee, and
Yeah.
and more meetings. We don't want that. But yeah, we respect that, and I guess we're just looking for turn signals when you start coming in our lane. Okay, just give us some turn signals.
There was a useful analogy that I think Ellie or Stephen may have shared with me about sort of the difference of the lanes and how that works. And yeah, it's individual assistance, and then there's sort of community and economic recovery. And the instance that was given to me was, if people are trying to get to like the Phoenix Fire Relief Center and there's no bus stop, the job of the LTRG would be to either bring them there via busing or provide a bus pass or whatever, but the R3V might be able to get the bus stop built at the place. And so it's the unmet needs of the individual versus the unmet needs of the community.
Yeah, good example. Thanks, Tucker.
I would say too, another thing that I would just say, Mark, this is Kathy Bryan, is that we want to build the COAD full of people who are ready to jump up and do what you've been leading folks to do this last couple of years in particular with the COAD group. And I think that's the thing that I know, that I was aware of COAD and it helped initiate organizations to be a part of it. But it was kind of like, how do we get that message out? And the fact that there is nobody who's in COAD right now, I think you said, that does public relations as their focus, is exactly why we need to like work together and help each other out, trying to figure out how do we cross communicate, because even with all the different mediums we have to communicate, still we're not hearing or seeing each other. And you guys are so important. I just am so moved by your presentation. Thank you so much for putting that together for all of us.
And Commissioner Dorie has his hand up.
Yeah, I just want to make it clear here, though, that Jackson County wants to work with all the stakeholders and all the providers. However, we really want to make sure that we do this in a simple, organized manner. And it can get very, very difficult for the various jurisdictions who clearly have responsibility for disaster planning, disaster response, and disaster recovery. That is clearly a governmental function to do that, even though you're going to work with all the partners and everything. And we want to make sure that we're not having to work with multiple groups with multiple tasks and overlapping it. It becomes very difficult for the jurisdictions to do that often. So this is about efficiency and effectiveness, and so we've been working with the LTRG and the RV COAD for some time. And as Mark mentioned, the RV COAD specifically is written into the county emergency operations plan. So what we want to make sure of is that, from our perspective at least, and I can't speak for the other jurisdictions, but we want to make sure that we have a very, very clear direction of which group is going to be working on what, and if we don't want that. I know that sometimes people say, well, overlap is okay. Well, that's not necessarily true from the jurisdictions and everything, because overlaps become difficult for organizations to work with and all. So we want to make sure that we've got some very, very clear lanes here. And so I'm just saying this from the Jackson County perspective. Particularly after you work with a guy like John Vile, who's done such great work on this, and as we move into the long-term recovery group, long-term recovery.
That's great. That's absolutely right. I mean, efficiency and effectiveness is at the heart of why R3V sprang up, right? This is core to our mission. And once that's all in place and we can respond to these kinds of events with effectiveness and efficiency and all of that, then the purpose of R3V goes away. And so we just want to be an extra layer of support for that for finding that, because every jurisdiction is already overwhelmed with the responsibilities that they've got, right? And most nonprofits are also overwhelmed at this point. So it's like an outrigger maybe that is a temporary thing. And I think Mark and I talked about this as well.
Well, let's be careful though, that necessarily just because it's an extra layer, sometimes an extra layer becomes an issue and everything. So I just want to make sure that we know everybody's got what everybody's doing, and this is well coordinated, because I'm concerned, just like Mark is here, is that we can get crosswise here, and there's various people, and we'll be overlapping, and people are not sure of which lane or what their mission is, and that makes it very, very difficult for the jurisdictions, particularly for some of the smaller jurisdictions that are working on these issues.
Absolutely.
I wonder if John Russell from FEMA might step in here, because it's actually, it's he and Beth, gosh, I'm forgetting Beth's name because I have too many friends named Beth, but anyway.
Garrett.
Who talked about the importance that people get tired, the people who are in the COAD and the people in LTRG are all working really hard because they're doing all this extra work on top of doing their individual assistance, and that it's good to have another stream that comes in for that community rebuilding, as Stephen pointed out, the infrastructure piece, and being in between, being the water in between all of the different islands. Weaving together, as Erica said. So that's just, I think it would be interesting from John Russell to point out.
With apologies, Kathy, John, I don't think that's necessarily the issue that Dave and Mark are raising. I think they're curious why this group is talking about preparedness today and the COAD VOAD.
Okay.
And I think the reason that we're doing it is that our last discussion, the question of preparedness came up. A couple of our organizations said, we're not really doing anything on preparedness, but we think we probably should. And so we thought, let's share the information about who could help them work on preparedness if they want to engage in that. So I think in this case of preparedness, absolutely, we're not trying to position R3V to take this on. We're trying to share information about the existing structures so the folks here at this table understand what those are. And maybe with that, we could turn to Holly Powers and Dorie Lanny. So Holly is our new Jackson County Emergency Manager. And Dorie Lanny is with Office of Emergency Management, so works for the state, but in this area, and her remit is specifically to support preparedness work. And so we asked them to sort of give us a baseline on the system with an eye towards where and how community-based organizations might want to plug in.
Thanks, Alex. As Alex said, I'm Dorie Lanny. I'm the Regional Response and Preparedness Coordinator with the Oregon Office of Emergency Management, serving Jackson and Josephine counties, as well as Douglas, Curry, and Coos counties, and the tribes in the Southwest region. So I will ask Holly to do a quick intro, and I'll pull up a few slides, and I just have to give some forewarning. This is some very basic preparedness information, just some considerations that you might think about in your personal and your workplace preparedness. We have a limited amount of time, so we'll be available at your convenience if you have any additional questions, and hopefully this isn't too basic for this group. Holly?
Thanks, Dorie. Good afternoon, everyone. Holly Powers. I am the new emergency manager here in Jackson County. I've been here a month and a week, roundabout, and just kind of immersing myself in all of our programs and coordination efforts that are going on across the county. I can say I am very excited that Mark was here and able to present on the COAD, because it is a wonderful organization. I'm very happy to be coming from up to this area and seeing a COAD as active and engaging as ours is. So I think that's a wonderful avenue. And back to what Dorie was mentioning, the basic information we're going to talk about, it really is just things for all of us to consider. And we're focusing a little more on business and community-based organizations and really making sure we take care of ourselves before we can take care of others. And that's kind of the basis for a lot of this presentation. And we appreciate everyone's time. So with that, Dorie, we'll go to the next slide. I just wanted to highlight the Rogue Valley natural hazards. This information is pulled from the Jackson County Natural Hazard Mitigation Plan. It is on the emergency management webpage. If you're interested in reading the whole 500-page document, it was published in early 2018 and it gets updated every 5 years. And we do a risk analysis based on the possible hazards that could impact Jackson County. And then we look at our vulnerabilities and our capabilities to respond to those hazards. And then we create a tiered system or the full analysis to see which hazards would impact us the most. What I listed here is I brought up both the state of Oregon and Jackson County, and these were the top hazards listed for our county. And then I put a red box around our top tier hazards, which are earthquake, emerging infection disease, wildfire, and winter storm. And for anyone who's been in Jackson County for an extended period of time, realizes that with the exception of maybe a large earthquake, we've been impacted by all of these types of hazards. So just wanted to highlight those for everyone's awareness and see how they coincide with the state of Oregon's also. So with that, next slide.
Okay, so we just wanted to highlight a few potential disaster impacts. I don't think any of this is a surprise to anybody, but we encourage you to take these into consideration when you're thinking about planning for your household, for your family, as well as for your business or community-based organization. Which of these impacts would significantly affect you, and how can you focus your planning around those particular impacts? So of course, there's the potential for injury. Our communication systems can be very vulnerable and impacted by any number of disasters. Damages to transportation facilities, disruption of healthcare services, as well as a separation of family, friends, and support networks, which is not something that we always think about when we're doing disaster planning, especially if we're in a role to serve disaster survivors. And then of course, community trauma, which I think that Jackson County is no stranger to after the fires in September. If this will let me advance, there we go. All right, so again, this is probably very familiar information to you, although you may not know about this great bathtub water tank. That's the nice one for if you think you may be about to lose water and you want to fill up for your family. So we recommend that, or I recommend, I'll ask Holly if she has a difference of opinion, to plan for at least 2 weeks of supplies. We see a lot of information about 72-hour kits. That's a great place to start if you don't have any supplies, but really 2 weeks for your entire household. And then we'll talk a little bit about workplace is recommended. So of course, that's 1 gallon of water per person per day, and extra for any animals, and extra for cooking. If you have a lot of dry, dehydrated type of foods, you might want to plan for extra for that. Non-perishable, easy to prepare foods, probably not the time post-disaster to get exotic with your diet. So we recommend things that you normally eat, you're used to preparing. And I recommend a trauma kit. We'll talk about that a little bit more in another slide. So rather than a first aid kit, a trauma kit, I think is more appropriate for disaster preparedness and planning. And then to plan for loss of power, having charged individual power banks that you carry with you at all times and making sure that they're regularly charged up. For individual emergency planning, so maybe some of you have already done all of this work, that's fantastic. But sometimes we don't think about how we will communicate with our families if we're separated by a disaster. And if we don't have communications. So what if your cell phone doesn't work? What if you can't reach your kids, your household members, friends, and loved ones? So we recommend designating an out of area contact. It may be harder to reach people in the impacted disaster area, and it may be easier to reach somebody outside of that area. So if everybody in your family is trying to text the same person and letting them know their status, where they are, that person can be collecting all of that information and then sharing it with all of you as you contact them. Along with that, texting is a lot easier to get through than phone calls. So if you can text that individual, if you can text each other, rather than calling, you have a much better chance of getting through. And then also keeping those phone lines open for emergency calls, for 911 calls, so that people with life-threatening emergencies have a chance of getting through to emergency services. Can really help that disproportionate load on communication systems during a disaster. And also a family reunification plan. If you can't reach each other, where will you meet up? When my son was younger and he went to school by our house, then our house was our top meetup spot. If we couldn't get to our house for some reason, then our second choice was a park near our home. And if that wasn't accessible, then a friend's house that was nearby was our meetup point. So talk to your family about how you will all contact each other. If you, for example, live on the other side of this road where nobody would be getting home at this point.
Mhm.
All right, so just quickly, preparing your workplace for disasters, pretty much the same types of supplies. You might just need to scale it up depending on what your operation looks like. If you need that operation to continue, then certainly water is the number one. Having some food on hand in the office in case people aren't able to leave immediately. And then your emergency power needs might be significantly different for your organization or business. So considering generated power, if you can afford it, obviously that can get very expensive if you're trying to power an entire building. Emergency communications, satellite phones are pretty expensive. That's a big lift for a lot of organizations, but that may be your only communication method, but also amateur radio. If you have an amateur radio operator in your organization, that equipment is relatively inexpensive and easy to set up in your organization. Trauma kits, as I mentioned, I recommend over first aid kits. Band-aids are nice to have around for day-to-day stuff, but for disasters, you're really trying to, in a worst case scenario, save lives until the professionals can get there. So if your organization is interested in Stop the Bleed training, that's available through a lot of different organizations. We can help connect you with those to teach you how to use a tourniquet and how to use compression bandages and things like that. So there are a lot of different places to get these materials. Running evacuation drills, how will everybody get out of the building? And how will you all find each other after you evacuate a building? So you may have a meetup point. In the event of an active shooter incident, obviously you do not want to congregate outside of that building. So talk through a few different plans for how you would evacuate and how you would find each other after that evacuation. And we're going to touch a little bit on continuity of operations planning. So I will turn that back over to Holly.
All right, unmute. Thanks, Dorie. I appreciate all those points. One of the things we want to talk about again is learning to take care of yourself before others. That applies not only to you as an individual within your family or your community, but also your business or community-based organization. So making sure your organization can take care of itself so that it can provide the much needed services to those out in the community. And so one of the things, I also put a few more resources in the chat, but here is the FEMA ready.gov platform that has a ton of information. And I specifically pulled some of the business information here because it's really about preparing employees and staff or volunteers, understanding and evaluating what risks are in the county and how those risks or hazards impact your system and structures or your supply chains. And then engaging in conversations about how we make those supply chains and other facets more resilient so that we can get back to as close to normal as possible again and get everyone back in school and back to work and back in their houses. So I just want to highlight some of the pillars of business preparedness here, which is staff, structures and systems, suppliers, and then services you provide. And within the ready.gov business platform, there's quite a few planning tools and media kits that can be utilized for organizations to go through and develop their own preparedness plans. And I think there'll be some resources at the end of the slide additionally from the SBA and other organizations that can support in some of these planning efforts. Next slide. And here, so one of the big things we talk about is this continuity of operations planning. And, really, what does that mean? How do we continue to operate during a disaster when we don't have communications or we don't have our normal infrastructure routes? The roads could be damaged or impacted. What about if our staff is all displaced and either don't have homes or staying in shelters, or there's other impacts that they're having? And how do we maintain, again, our operations based on that? And having an understanding of those essential services and those essential tasks that we have to complete versus the ones that could wait a day or a week or a month. And so these are just some really good questions, trigger questions for us to all think about as we work through our planning. And again, there's a link at the bottom there for additional resources on business continuity planning. Not only can you do I would say a simple plan within your own organization, but there are many certified business continuity planners out there that can assist, obviously at some cost, but can assist in developing those types of plans for you. And then I'll hand it over to Dorie. Is there anything to add?
All right, so I can't get through a preparedness presentation without at least touching on donations management. So this can be sometimes called the disaster after the disaster. Some of you may be familiar with that. So the photo on the right is from post-Hurricane Harvey, and the photo on the left, I'm not recalling where that was from. Somebody from Red Cross provided that to me. So often after a major disaster, everybody wants to help. The community wants to come together and assist survivors. And sometimes the best way they can think to do that is people who have lost everything need everything. So they want to help with donating goods, clothing, all kinds of household items. So I would just caution anybody who's considering opening a donations site to work with your local emergency manager, work with the COAD organizations that have a lot of experience in this area and are really familiar with donations management, because what we tend to see happening is that a lot of well-meaning people will sometimes take that opportunity to clear out their garage, and will bring old mattresses, moldy clothing. We've seen all kinds of interesting items land at a donation collection site. So that becomes an additional problem for that local impacted community to deal with. And sadly, I've seen situations where an entire parking lot was full. The community could not manage it with all of the immediate response and recovery needs, and it ended up being rained on. So anything that was salvageable in those donations could not be used, and it was eventually bulldozed into a landfill at the community's expense. So I'll get off my donations management soapbox there. And I'd like to highlight community emergency response teams. I don't know if there are any CERT members in this group, but I am a big fan of CERT training. I've been teaching CERT since 2012. And I think it's a great next step. If you feel like you're pretty prepared, your organization has done those first few steps, or you as a household or family want to take that next step in disaster preparedness, the CERT training. This is just a few of the modules that are covered in the standard, the basic course. Disaster prep, putting together a home kit, disaster medical operations, so how to use that trauma kit. Disaster psychology, this is my favorite section to teach, how disasters impact us during, after, and sometimes for many years to come, or the rest of our lives. fire safety and utility controls. If you don't know now where your gas shutoff is in your house, please go home today and find it and make sure you have an accessible tool. So if you do have a gas leak, you're able to turn that off. And there is a link at the bottom for finding a CERT program locally. And Holly may be able to add some more information there.
We do have a few organizations that have CERT programs within the county. So the best option is to go there and see which ones are certified in your neighborhood.
And if you're interested in finding out more information, please contact either of us. Our contact info is at the end here. All right, so just a few other points to emphasize that we, as Holly said, we can't help others if we ourselves need help. So the best thing that we can do to make our communities more resilient is to be prepared as individuals, as families, as communities, and as organizations, so that we don't become the people who need help. And it can be intimidating to build up all of these emergency supplies. Just start with water, start small if you don't have anything, and just add items as you can. And of course, please, if you're not already signed up for emergency alerts in your community, sign up for those today. Holly, would you like to add anything else there?
No, I think that was thank you for the great plug at the end. I think the key component here is not only yourself, but any family, friend, business, coworker, to make sure they're either signing up for Citizen Alert if they haven't already, or they are updating or refreshing their logins and addresses. You can put up to 5 addresses into Citizen Alert. So I have my house, my work, my kids' school, my kids' daycare, my husband's work are my 5 addresses. And then I would receive an alert anytime any of those physical addresses are included in one of our emergency alerts. And so that's a capability in our Everbridge system under our citizen alerting program. We did recently just run a campaign hoping to get Jackson and Josephine County residents signed up. But in any way we can share that, that message is going to be key. I do also want to mention on emergency alerting, it is address based. So the majority of time when we're sending alerts, it's going to be specific to an address that's impacted, not a county-wide informational. So there are times people go, well, I didn't know this was going on. And it's because we're trying to make sure the people who need to take action based on the alert we're sending are getting that primary message. And then we try and follow up on the informational side with our social medias, our websites, and our media partners on relaying the information to the broader group of constituents in the area. So again, here we just have some resources, some additional resources for everyone to look at to see what might work best for their organization or situation. And then I think the last slide is our contact info for follow-up. And as Commissioner Dotter mentioned, the County Emergency Management, which is me right now, we will be hiring additional staff, but we really work closely with the COAD, the cities, and other organizations on kind of building more of a strategic plan on emergency management, preparedness, response, recovery, and mitigation. And there's a lot of components of those, all phases of emergency management that intertie and interrelate between many of the groups that are doing good work in the county. So we're always looking for opportunities to coordinate and share and make sure we're preparing our communities and being as resilient as possible. All right.
All right, with that, I'm going to stop sharing the screen and check the chat. I know there's been some activity. So Holly, I don't know if you're seeing this. Let me see, just scrolling up. All right, so there's some great links that some of you have shared in the chat. Thanks very much. And Holly, there's a question about, are emergency alerts in Jackson County available in multiple languages?
So we would be aiming to send those emergency alerts in multiple languages, primarily English and then in Spanish. And then depending on the timing of the incident, we would look at additional translations as needed. So, but it, you know, that level 3 go now needs to be sent immediately. And so we always, we're looking right now with some, sorry for that, additional translation services, but It's always our goal.
And does an account have to be created for Citizen Alert?
Yeah, so you do have to create an account for Citizen Alert and log in that way. The city of Ashland uses Nixle, which is a zip code or keyword base. So you don't create an alert, you send a text in to receive notifications via your zip code or a keyword, so an event or a type of disaster. So if you live in the city of Ashland, that would be a resource for you to receive alerts.
And I'll just add that due to the constrained time frame for this presentation, we were not able to touch on how to make emergency planning, response, and preparedness more accessible. That is a whole other very large discussion about access and inclusion and equity. And we would be happy to address that on a different day to talk about emergency planning for individuals with access and functional needs in your organization or community, for example. Are there any more questions for us? Sorry, go ahead, Holly.
No, there's one more questions in the chat. So we actually do have some videos on the rvem.org and the Jackson County Emergency Management site on signing up for Citizen Alert. So there are some resources there. There's also a form that can be completed via paper and emailed in. I'm pretty sure that's on the website as well. So.
Great. If you could drop some links into those kinds of things,
Yeah.
That would be great, because I mean, one of the goals here is to really amplify what you folks are doing, right? And here we have a bunch of leaders of all kinds of organizations who can make this information accessible to others and really get this out to the street. And that's what we're going to be talking about in our breakout rooms, starting in just a minute. But I want to keep the floor open for anybody who has any other questions. And we'll get all these links and the slides and all of that put up on our website so that everybody can have them available and distribute them to their clients and constituents and organizations. That's great.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Alex.
So we did, obviously, the localities have an important role to play in emergency response and preparedness. We invited those folks at a late date, but thought that really the core information today, I think we've covered well. But Kelly, I don't know if you or any of our other city folks would want to add anything as from a city perspective of what you'd like to see the community-based organizations, should they be trying to engage at the city level, or would you encourage them to, focus on, as we heard, self-preparation and then maybe CERT training?
I'm Kelly Matting. I'm the Deputy City Manager for the City of Medford, and probably the best person to answer that would have been Aaron Ott, who is our Emergency Manager here at the city. And so, to be honest with you, I don't know, and I would be sort of remiss if I were to just kind of guess. He is the expert. I do think that if that is a question and this group, has there's a leader of this group that can distribute information, I would be happy to ask him what he thinks about that and have him communicate with whoever you are, and you could send that information out. But I would probably say, I think the one thing I can be assured that he would say is there's never too much preparation.
Right on. Yeah, when we send out the slides, I think in addition to that, sort of the priorities, I think, would be making sure that we put the Everbridge, the Citizen Alert link at the top, and any other local community alert structures that people might want to be sharing with their.
And the Get Ready Rogue website, that link is kind of a link to all of those other ones. So I should have mentioned that you can get all the alert sign up links on Get Ready Rogue. Awesome.
Great, Dorie.
And our Citizen Alert is shared between Jackson and Josephine County. So whether you reside or work in either one, it's the same system for sign up for both counties.
Great.
same length.
And we also invited Connie Wilkerson. The RV COG has a program that focuses on making sure that some particularly vulnerable folks are get the extra attention they need. So Connie, please, if you could share a little info about that.
Thank you all for this opportunity to present some information about our disaster registry. In the past, I think many of you worked with Connie Saldana, whoever saw that in her role here. Connie retired in January and is currently only working on our lifelong housing initiative. And so I want to introduce you today to Cassie Rose. Cassie is our program and advocacy coordinator, and she oversees the disaster registry, and we'll be taking you through a quick introduction of it.
Thanks, Connie. Okay, I'm going to share my screen here. There you go. So I have the privilege of working at Rogue Valley Council and Government's Senior and Disability Services Department, and we also serve residents in Jackson and Josephine County. So like the Citizen Alert System, we get to cover both territories. The disaster registry came as a recommendation from the Vulnerable Populations Committee that was a response to the 1997 floods. We really exist to bring a voice to people that weren't capable of helping themselves. On a side note, we have this little Go Stay kit thing that we've created years ago and is still published. So I just want to throw it out there that yes, we still are part of that. If you have questions about that, you can contact me offline. The disaster registry exists to help with elderly, frail, and people with disabilities stay informed during a disaster event. There's ultimately 3 layers to the registry. We keep track of vulnerable individuals, childcare facilities, and senior living facilities, be it independent adult foster homes, skilled nursing, anything senior living related. And we work with the state licensure agencies to keep those additional layers up to date on a biannual basis. The disaster registry provides details about people who need special assistance to emergency personnel and first responders during disasters. And we rely very heavily on our relationship with the county managers. So poor Holly has heard this presentation 3 times in the last 24 hours. So my apologies, Holly. But our relationship with the emergency managers is critical. Being on the disaster registry doesn't guarantee an individual that they will get help first in a disaster, but it does mean that more people will know about, care about, and communicate about their need for special assistance. The team at RV COG is responsible for collecting the data, verifying the data, and maintaining a very complex database of it. We ask a variety of questions that are really focused on documenting people's special needs. We have a team of volunteers that complete quarterly updates with all of our participants in the registry. Most of our volunteers have worked with us for many years, so there is a very much a sense of trust built into it. We make updates on things like contact information, case managers, service providers, physical conditions and disabilities that change and evolve over time, mental health, memory and cognition issues that move and change over time, medications, we update care providers, durable medical equipment, maybe the need for oxygen evolves over time. We do additions and deletions based on death records. And of course, we track if somebody's moving in or out of an independent living facility into a care facility where they may no longer need our special attention. Our volunteers are diligent to really just document any and all changes. If we can't reach somebody on our registry, we have a strict protocol that we follow to contact their emergency contacts. During an event, I mentioned we work with the emergency managers. They're going to call us and we're going to have a GIS team behind the scenes that's going to load map layers into data registries that we are going to access and the emergency responders have access to. And then we at the registry begin calling out and outreaching to the vulnerable people. We inform them about the event, the proximity that they have to it. We assess the barriers that they're facing at that time, and then we make appropriate suggestions to get them the help that they need. If it comes down to it, that may be looping back in the EM or the EMS system. This is a very specialized and person-centered intervention that we take on. I want to just give you 3 quick examples. I'll be as brief as I can in the interest of time, but during the Alameda fire, our Semper phone call was the first contact that we'd had to a shut-in that had no TV, no radio, no family, no internet. He had 0 knowledge that the fire was fastly approaching. We were able to act early and outreach to him, and ultimately able to catch him a ride with a rural neighbor that was passing by. This saved, any of EMS's work and efforts. We were able to locate an obese gentleman that required the assistance of 3 to 4 people. We were able to activate the emergency management team to send the right number of people to help him instead of showing up with one individual person to try and get him out. So that ultimately saved him. And then, in the snowpocalypse in 2019, we were able to identify a frail elderly woman living isolated in the Cave Junction area. She needed some food and firewood, and we were able to activate search and rescue to get a snowmobile out there to help them. So we've had a lot of success in those areas. We have found through the years, as experts working with the demographic of older adults and the disabled, that there's always a need for increased supportive and wraparound services, and disaster preparedness really falls into that. During our quarterly call process, we have been able to identify clients that were at increased risk of fall. We've intervened and provided them with connections to Food and Friends or referrals to the Aging and Disability Resource Connection. We've learned about elder abuse cases and made referrals to ombudsmen accordingly. Currently, we're in the process of developing our service equity plan to expand to have a multicultural service model that includes the hiring of certified translators, and we are out for contract for hiring language line interpretation services right now. Today, what I really want to just leave with is just for you to understand that we are open to the bigger collaboration piece, and we're really excited to explore how the registry can integrate into new systems across both county lines that will benefit our citizens, including the most vulnerable. And I won't talk deeply about it, but that includes Community Connect that is rolling out in all of Josephine County through the fire districts. The community cares response units that some of the Fire District 3s rolled out with social service workers that also go along with their EMS team. So there's lots of room for collaboration in the future. We want to leave you with the notion that we really understand how to serve the frail, the elderly, the homebound, and the disabled populations. And we're aware of barriers and challenges that are out there. We're here to advocate for them and to be all of your partners in this work that y'all doing. You talk about the lanes that you're in, and we have a lane too, but we're wanting to collaborate with y'all. So the last thing I would just say is that we're open to volunteers for the first time in a long time. So we want to bring more people into our quarterly process. If you know anyone that might be a good fit, I know Mark's got millions of volunteers, so we make contact with me. We're here to answer questions, provide presentations to your community groups, and then of course connect with any of your vulnerable clients that could benefit from being on the registry. So thanks for your time and attention today.
Thank you. That's great. Thank you for all your work in the community. That's extremely valuable, especially in times of crisis. So let's see, we're a little bit behind on our timeline. I'm wondering, I think that we will take a little bit of time here and break out just for, say, maybe 10 minutes to break into small groups and just have a quick conversation around a couple of questions. What questions, open questions, remain in your mind around preparedness, right? and our response? And what is your organization doing to help with kind of preparedness and responsiveness? With that, I'll put those questions in the chat, put these 2 questions in the chat here, and then I'll let us break out into groups of 4 or 5. We find that this is valuable because it helps us to just build our relationships with each other. And that's one of the purposes of this group. So let me drop the questions into the chat real quickly. Thank you, Cassie, for providing your contact information. That's great. Let's see. We've got 6 rooms. Okay, we'll see you back. Let's see, it is now 35 after. So let's meet back at 10 till, and I'll call you back. Welcome back, everybody.
Yeah, I saw the 59-second warning go up, and then I was automatically transferred.
Oh no, sorry about that.
Yeah, Tucker, you want to finish your thought?
Oh, no, I was just sure. I was just saying that, as we track sort of how people want to be responded to or contacted post-disaster, it's really interesting to understand the various official ways that's being approached, and trying to overlay both those sort of community-generated response needs as well as the official sort of response methods, and how we can make those and create a closer relationship there.
Right, that's one of the things that we were talking about also, is like, how can nonprofits kind of take these messages about preparedness, but also about getting evacuation, and make sure that the people in their client base can get it, even if those people aren't comfortable giving their number and their address and everything else to a government entity. So that might be a future conversation to have about how do we do that. Did anybody else talk about that, or any other topics? Love to hear.
Hi, my name's Elib Christwire. I haven't met a lot of you, but I'm on with the LTRG, so I've been involved in these conversations in another lane. But Bio asked me to finish the thought that I was sharing at the end of our conversation as well, which is that as we prepare for this next disaster, and as we look at ensuring that emergency responses are in Spanish, for example, making sure that that is a high priority as we develop that as a county, that another aspect of that is in the rebuild, centering the idea that these multi-generational families and multi-generational neighborhoods really rely on the word of mouth to communicate information. And if we aren't thinking about replacing communities that really are culturally appropriate and the communities that were lost, I think we are losing an important part of the emergency broadcast system, which is that word of mouth. And so as we are looking at rebuilding, really trying to prioritize those communities that were displaced. And in doing so, we are going to create more preparedness and resiliency for these next disasters.
Yeah, I would like to piggyback on what Elib said and Kate started in our small group. I think, that, Kate was speaking about how, like, and Elib said, like, how people, a lot of it was word of mouth, like when the fire was happening, and this was said earlier as well, when the fire was happening, people knocked on their neighbors' doors, or I remember Erika, you mentioned previously how neighbors were getting, their neighbors' kids out of the house, or like picking them from school and all that kind of stuff. And all of that is not something necessarily that we can, like, oh, where's your buddy, right? Like you need the phone tree or something like that. It's like, that's not really, I mean, we could say that, but it's not necessarily unless you have like a phone tree already basically like in your own kind of like mind of your own connections, it's not really, it's not as easy to do. And I'm wondering because of like the diverse group that we have here, I'm wondering if like community rebuilding efforts, not so much like the physical, but the relationship rebuilding efforts is something that we might want to tackle, like the work that Erika is doing with, sharing stories and getting people together to talk about the trauma and also things that are like not trauma related. Is something that we can, if the group would be interested in building those type of like disaster directly related activities.
I think that's at the heart of our mission, Bio, is the rebuilding of community, relationships, communication channels, and trust. I mean, at the core, that's, to me, that's our work, is to rebuild trust, and that will happen one relationship at a time, and that will turn into telephone trees and equity and all of these good things that we need, and the ability to trust people to go pick up our kids and get them to the meeting place, or whatever that means.
So I just put in the chat, the ready.gov, I think I shared it in some, but specifically the kids section. There's some really cool resources in here and that can be used. And there's games and checklists. There's like a comic book that's based on disaster preparedness and management. So it's geared more towards that visual component. Because I know a lot of times when you want to impact a habit or some of the stuff we're talking about, right? You access the kids because they're going to bring it home and be like, look, mom, look what I learned about today. And that starts that conversation about preparedness. And so FEMA has done a lot of work. And you know, while there might be some FEMA logos on it, it's really more like that ready with the green check mark. So it doesn't have as much of that government association with it. But it can create some education and components. There's educator specific links in here. So for the schools, there is curriculum based on emergency preparedness. So, you know, long-term goals could be looking at how we incorporate some of these aspects into our schools and that sort of thing. So anyway, just another resource for linking through and looking at.
It's great, Holly. Thank you. And you know, it may be interesting as part of our conversation here at R3V is to look at to have some of our folks from some of the communities look at this and see how culturally appropriate it might be, and there might be some minor tweaks or layer that we can add on top that would make it much more accessible and, you know, increase the uptake, because it's all about getting that conversation going at home. No
they
matter
do
what
have,
language is being spoken.
yeah, and they do have many of the everything translated. So FEMA does have to comply with the 508 compliance, which is at a minimum Spanish translation of their documents. So like I just pulled up the base ready checklist in Spanish, but they also have simplified Chinese and a couple other, I just had it up. They have English, Korean, traditional Chinese, Spanish, simplified Chinese, and Vietnamese. And then there's a couple other for some of them. So there is, you know, there's some languages available there already in some of those checklists.
I have a question, Holly. How far along is the county in their efforts to being able to make an emergency response system available in Spanish? How far along is that, and what ways does the county need support to make that happen?
Are you meaning translating the alert messages?
Yeah, and
So
making those available in Spanish.
I actually just met with all the law chiefs and fire chiefs today to agree upon standardized messaging for specifically our evacuations. And so that's the priority messaging for us right now. We'll build out more templates as we go forward. So we have a few tweaks left on that language, and then we would just be using a translator in order to put that into Spanish. And then the issue is always going to be some of the information that needs to be shared during an event has to be translated right then and there, right? As far as location. So I can put street addresses, obviously, but any of the additional directional information, you know, I can't translate it myself. And so there's always the weighing the option of sending an alert right away versus waiting for a translation. And that's something we always struggle with as far as making sure we're alerting appropriately across the board. And there's no right answer. Because no matter what we do, it's impacting someone in a different way. So it's just trying to do our due diligence and put together a plan as best we can to meet the needs of the population.
And are there community partners who are helping you with that, or is that just a project within the county?
It'll be community partners. We're just kind of like the phased approach, you know, got to get some of our ducks in a row. And as I mentioned, since I've only been here a month, I'm just still trying to make some of those connections and work through it. So.
Well, the LTRG would be interested in helping to support that.
Okay.
If you want to reach out, I think that's something that is right in our lane as well. So.
This is Kathy from Munite, and that's something that that is very important to us as well. Because of the large number of Spanish-speaking families that were impacted by the fires, that is a huge importance to us. And there was really nothing that went out in Spanish for them other than the goodness of neighbors and police officers taking them out of their homes, literally.
Okay, noted. Thank you. I appreciate that.
I want to do a shout out that I think it was Erica who a while ago said it would be great. It's great to have things translated in English, Spanish, and any other language, but the other thing might be to do verbal. And if there's a way, Holly, that we could figure out how to do like verbal like messaging. And I know that's part of what the Nixle, I think that's what it's called, Nixle, is supposed to do, but I'm just wondering. And again, I don't know, but just to start thinking about it is.
Yeah. So that'll be the harder part for the translation, and that'll be the delay in the most likely the Spanish translation. So any message I send, I will record verbally. So, but I have to have a phone number in order for you to receive that message verbally. So the alerts when they go out are going to be, email, text, and then also go when I'm phone calling you, you're going to pick up. You'll hear wait on the line for an emergency alert, and then you'll hear my voice or whoever the alerter is that's literally reading the alert that we just sent out in any of the other contact forms. So if you as a resident, if I have a landline, like a copper landline, then you're going to receive that notification whether or not you opted in, because I have access to that data through CenturyLink. And so I upload that data into the system, but that's only copper landline. If you have a VoIP landline, that's similar to a cell phone as far as my database is concerned. So you have to opt in your VoIP to your address. And so there is no, like I said, there is no one size fixes everything tool. We try and use everything we can, as many of your organizations do, right, to get the alerts out. But even the copper landlines, there's capacity. So not every landline can take 75 phone calls coming through it at the same time. Those providers have limitations on how many calls can be going, crossing paths at the same time. And so there can be delays in some of those voice calls. And that's a systematic, we have no control over that at the county level issue. And so there's just always ways for us trying to figure out how we multi alert and get that information out that's going to be the most effective during that current situation.
Holly, and and this may be out of our control, your control, but if and when there is an opportunity to reconsider the citizen alert branding, I mean, citizen is sort of an unfortunate term to use for a service that we hope to be available to anybody who happens to live here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that feedback.
Awesome.
I guess it's really, we have organizations here who can reach some of these populations because they have telephone trees, they have, data that you don't have about who needs what kind of a message. And so in our conversation, in our breakout room, we talked about, the COGS and, Senior and Disabled Services database. We're wondering if that exists for some of the communities who might not be in your database. And if, maybe that we could make some kind of a tool that would allow those messages to be taken from you, translated into the right channels and language or whatever, and get it out to the street via some of these nonprofit groups. Like, how could we partner? It's not something we can answer today, but it's really on a nonprofit side. You're going to produce what you produce, Holly, and make it timely and as accessible as possible. But then there might be a translation and a distribution function that the nonprofit community can organize around as well. That could reach.
An interesting thought. Yeah.
So, but that'll have to be for another day. But this has been a great conversation, and really thank you, Holly, for stepping into an amazingly challenging role. My hat is off if I was wearing one to you. You are in the deep end of the pool. So,
jumped right in.
Yes, your little water wings are over your head probably. but it's, yeah, will be for a while. So at any rate, so thank you for your work and thank you for being with us today. And so I just want to acknowledge that we are over time, but just in closing, there is, just so everybody knows, there's a So Ready annual picnic at Blue Heron Park coming up on the 30th from 4 to 7 p.m. And so that, if you know of any business owners who would like to know what So Ready's up to and kind of be updated and connect with some resources there, that's going to be happening. And upcoming topics. So what we're thinking about is looking at equity and inclusion in the rebuilding process as our next topic for 2 weeks from now. So, and we're thinking about having the LTRG Equity Committee, maybe a whole set of people from various communities who are involved in R3V, and maybe there are some people also from Portland around OHA and from United Way of Columbia Willamette, who are doing a whole learning community around equity. Kathy, you know more about that than I do. And anyway, so anybody who has ideas about that, does that, first of all, does that sound like a good topic? Just thumbs up if you want. If that sounds like a good topic for next time. Okay, great. And then maybe we can include maybe also, you know, there's an open invitation, Erica and Bayo, to talk about Coalition and some of the things that you guys are doing, and it may tie into this next one, or you guys let us know when that sounds good. Okay. And then at some point, we'll also get around to talking about business with Terrell and everybody else about that. So, okay, so we're going to run with this topic of equity and inclusion in the rebuilding process. Please, we would love for you to give us your thoughts on who should be included in that conversation. Okay, thank you all for being here. Thank you for all the work you're doing. Take care of yourselves and enjoy the sunshine.
Take care, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. Good to see you all.